Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be concentrating on creating this pretty interesting and unique carousel. So we've got two gradients on either side, and then we've got obviously the skewed text of each testimonial. And of course we have the opaque and transparent slides. So stay tuned and we're going to build this right now. Right, so to kick off this project, we'll have three files, the index.html file, style.css, and main.js. So I've got them set up here in my code editor. And first up, I'm going to populate the index.html file. So here's our boilerplate HTML. So now I'm just going to add some bits and pieces here. So first up is a font from Google Fonts, which is called Nonito. So we'll copy all of this and paste it into our head area. Now let's link up our style sheet. So we'll just say link rel style sheet, type text CSS, and the href is style.css. Next, let's add an area for our testimonials, and we'll call it fet testimonials. And then inside this section, we'll create a wrapper that will basically constrain everything inside it to a certain width, which we'll add shortly to our CSS file. And the final thing on this page for the moment is to add in our jQuery library, which I've just copied from a CDN, and then just our main.js file. And now we can start adding some styles into our style sheet. And the first thing I do here is to create a wildcard and then create some rules that basically resets the paddings and margins and box size. And then basically just give it the font family of Nonito, the font that we've just downloaded from Google. Okay, so next up after the wildcard is the wrapper. So this is basically going to constrain everything that we put inside it to a max width of 960 pixels. And then we'll just center everything with the margin 0 auto rule. Oh, and almost forgot, we need to add some padding to the left and right of just 15 pixels. And on second thoughts, we can actually remove that red border. And the last file we need to populate is main.js. And here we're just going to add some jQuery boilerplate that basically just says, once the page is loaded, run this code. But we'll get to that shortly. So I'm just going to go back into our style sheet where we can actually begin styling up our carousel. So I'm going to use the class that we've created previously called fet-testimonials, give it a background of red just to see what we're dealing with here. And then we're going to say min height is something like 600 pixels. And this looks pretty good here. We can see the red background and the wrapper is constraining the text to 960 pixels. So let's go into our index.html file, add a heading and a description. Now let's remove that test text and let's replace that with a heading 2 and we'll call it something like Muscle Factory Testimonials because this is for a fictional gym. And we'll just give it a paragraph with a class of description and give it some lorem ipsum here. Now let's give the whole testimonials area some breathing room. So I'm going to say padding top and bottom will be 75 pixels. Now let's create some styles for a heading and a paragraph, center everything and make them white. And just another little tweak here before we move on. We're going to target the heading 2 and we're basically just going to make it uppercase and we're going to give it a margin bottom of 20 pixels just to make things a little bit more spacious. Right, so now we need to install the Slick Carousel library, the JS file and the CSS file. So I'm going to use this website here, cdnjs.com, get our two links and then paste them into our HTML file. So just before our style.css, I'm going to paste it in there, and that is the slick.css file. And then at the bottom of our page with other JavaScript files, we're going to insert the Slick Carousel JavaScript file just above our main.js. So that is slick.min.js. And now we can actually begin with the fun stuff. So inside of our index.html file, just below this description, we're going to create an area to hold our testimonials. And I'm just going to call it something like fet-testimonials wrapper. And here inside of this wrapper, we can start listing our testimonials. So I'm just going to call them fet-testimonial. And we'll just give it some lipsum text there. And then we can see now that's displaying. So copy and paste this a few more times. Maybe I'll set it to 5 slides. And there is our carousel finished. So congratulations. No, I'm joking. Let's move on to the next step. Right, so in our style sheet, we're going to basically style these slides up here now. And I'm going to say fet testimonials wrapper. And we're going to basically just give it a border of something like 2 pixels, solid white, just so we can kind of see what's going on. Now, just under this wrapper, we're going to say fet testimonial to target each slide. And we're going to say something like height is maybe 225 pixels. Yeah, just like that. And then we'll say the max width is 600 pixels. Okay, so that's fine for the moment. We need to actually initialize our Slick library, which we'll do now in a moment. And now to initialize the Slick carousel, we'll say jQuery parent of our slides, which is fet testimonials wrapper dot slick brackets, then curly brackets, and there we are. We have a technically working carousel. Right, so I think it's time to start fleshing out these testimonials. So I'm going to go to a website called loremipsum.io and basically just generate some paragraphs of text here and then use these for our testimonial blocks. And now we can actually remove some of these testimonials. So we'll keep one here to populate, but first things first, we have to give it a block quote tag inside of the testimonial just to give it some semantic meaning. And we can pop in our lorem ipsum paragraph. And very quickly, I'm just going to populate the other 4 slides now. Right, so we are definitely getting closer to it actually looking like a proper carousel. Now, it's great having all these testimonials, but we do need to add citations for each testimonial. So underneath our block quote tag, we're going to add a citation, and that's going to be in the form of a cite tag. So I'm going to populate these now. The first one will be Ralph. And we'll quickly move on here. So we'll copy Ralph and we'll paste this next one. That's Tim. And then there's Isla. And then we've got Bernard. And the last one will be Homer. So now we have citations and quotations for our testimonials. Okay, so next up, we have to basically style each testimonial block. So before we do that, I'm going to add another div inside of our fet testimonial div. And I'll simply call this fet testimonial inner. So basically this is the div that's going to be styled, and that's going to be the background of white. So let's add these in first, and then we can move on to our style sheet. So all these inner divs have been added. It's now time to pop back into our style sheet and begin styling them up. And just below our fet testimonial class, we'll add another class, which will be the fet testimonial inner one. And we'll give it a background color of white. And on the next line, we're going to give it a border radius of about maybe 12 pixels, just to give each testimonial a nice curved border. And then on the third line, we're going to say padding is 25 pixels, just to give everything a bit more breathing room here. And that's looking pretty good at the moment. Now, so we're going back into our main.js file, and we're basically just going to add some options here to our Slick carousel. The first option we're going to add is an option called center mode, and that's going to be true. So basically in our design for this carousel, each testimonial is basically going to be centered on the screen or inside of the carousel. So as each new testimonial slides into view, it's going to be centered on the screen. Now let me add in another option here first before explaining the third option. So center mode is true, and then we're going to remove the arrows real quick now, and the arrows being the next and previous buttons. Okay, so basically I found out I need to add this third option called variable width, and that value is going to be true. Now, I've no idea why this needs to be added in here for this center mode to work, but it's basically just some trial and error that I've kind of figured out. And that seems to work fine there, but a little bit of a weird one, but there we go. Okay, so back into our style sheet to wrap up this fet testimonial class. So we're going to give it some margin here to the left and right, just to basically just give everything a bit of space here. So that looks good. 15 pixels each side, which is 30 pixels when you add them together. And then we're going to say opacity is 0.5 because only the main carousel item will actually be fully opaque. And on second thoughts, let's make that opacity 0.3. Okay, yeah, much better. Okay, so let's continue here. We need to add a few more styles for the fet testimonial div, and we're going to say padding bottom here, which is about 120 pixels, but don't worry too much about this declaration. This will be used later on. Okay, so the next declaration we need to add is the transform property, and we're going to use the skew function that is basically just going to skew the div to about minus 15 degrees, just like that. And that skews everything inside, such as the text. So we'll look at that a little bit later on. And the very last style we need to add in here is a transition. So this is basically just to ease the transition when we're changing the opacity. That will be a little bit later on also. But that is basically our Fet testimonial styles all ready to go. So before we move on de-skewing the text, we do need to do one thing with the Slick Carousel CSS. So you'll see here I've created a new rule called Slick-track, and that is a class. So that class is actually embedded into the Slick Carousel by default. And I'll show you what I mean here. So you can see here we have a class Slick-track, and that is embedded before each Fet testimonial. So what we'll do now in a moment is basically make this Slick track display flex, and then each subchild, which is a Fet testimonial or a Slick-slide, make that basically centered with flex also. Okay, so let's do this quickly here. Slick track display flex, and basically each subchild, which is a Fet testimonial or a Slick-slide. And then here, we're just going to use the display flex option again, and we're going to center everything there. Oh, and also give it a height of auto to make everything work properly. And if we take a peek in the right-hand window, which is the browser, we can see that each testimonial is now centered. Okay, so at this point, I think we have to start de-skewing the text that we skewed earlier on. So I'm going to copy this Fet testimonial class here, and then we're just going to target the block quote inside. So here, we're basically going to flip the skew on its head. So we're going to say transform skew 15 degrees. And just like magic, the text is now de-skewed. And also we can see that the citation is still skewed. I'm going to leave it there just as a stylistic choice. So I think it actually looks pretty cool. And I think the last style we need to add for the block quote is some margins. So basically, I'm going to add some negative margins here for the top, bottom, and left and right. So here we'll say top is -2 pixels and to the left is -20 pixels, because over the next few steps, we're going to be basically making some CSS classes and we're going to be indenting them manually. So this kind of gives us a nice baseline to work with. And last little step here before we move on, we just need to style the active slide, which is the center slide. And we basically just need to say any Fet testimonial, which has a class of Slick active, make that opacity 1. And I'm just going to open up the inspector panel here to show you exactly what I mean. So here we can see Slick active on our main slide. And then if we just type in opacity 1, save that. And then we can see now that is actually active and the opacity is fully opaque. And our next step is to add in the speech bubble tail to our testimonials. So you can see here I'm in Adobe Illustrator, and I've basically just created this little graphic here, and I've cut off the tail end of it. And you'll see in the next section now that I've got speech-tail.svg saved here. So it's currently black at the moment, just to kind of show you the outline of it, but I'm going to change it back to white to suit our design. And then I'm going to export it into our project. And there it is there in our VS Code editor. And all we're left to do is to actually add it in via our style sheet to the Fet testimonial area. Okay, so the area actually we're going to concentrate on is the Fet testimonial inner area, because that has our white background. So I'm just going to create a new pseudo before element, and I'm going to say, well, first of all, let's give it a border so we can see what's kind of going on. So I'm going to say border is 1 pixel solid blue. Okay, it's somewhere in there, but we can't see it just yet. And for the value, we'll just say double empty quotation strings. And there we go. Okay, so now let's give it a position of absolute and then give it a width and a height. And I'll just say something like width is 50 pixels and height is 50 pixels. Okay, so now we have the outline of our speech bubble tail. Now let's position this down to the bottom of the Fet testimonial inner div. So let's say bottom is 0. Okay, great. And then let's just say left and maybe push it in a bit, maybe 35 pixels. And that looks good. Okie dokie. Now it's time to actually pop in the background image. And let's pop in speech-tail.svg. Okay, great. And let's add in some extra background options here. So we'll say left/contain, no repeats. So that looks perfect to me here. And I think I'm just going to remove that blue border as it's not really needed now. We can see the speech tail. So let me pop into our style sheet and remove it there. Okay, so we're finally onto the meat of the project here. So this is all about indenting the text on each line, and this is a bit of a manual process, so be warned. So the basic idea here is to create some span elements for each line of text with an associated margin class, so we can control the left margin line by line. I'm first going to create a primary fet-indent class that will make all of our spans display as inline block instead of inline. Then I'll create a list of generic classes with like varying units of margin left values. This should give us a good base to get going. So here's our span.fet-indent class, and that will basically just make everything display inline block. Now, so here comes the real work in this project. Here I'm going to create some fet-indent classes, so we can use these in each testimonial. And for our first indent class, we have fet-indent2, which basically just adds 2 pixels margin left to that class. So we're going to follow this format here. So we'll create fet-indent4, that will be margin left 4 pixels, and so on. And I'm just going to finish up on fet-indent50, and that will give us a good amount of values at our disposal. So with all of our indent classes created, let's go into our index.html file and actually add these into our testimonial area. But before we do that, we just need to add in the generic class, which is fet-indent. So span class fet-indent. And that will just make all of these spans display inline block. And let's just move these windows here so we can actually see what we're doing. Okay, and just close off that span tag. And there we go. And if we inspect this here now, we see the display inline block. Fantastic. And we're at a point now where we can add in one of our indent classes just to show you how these are going to work. So I'm going to pop in fet-indent20, and you can see here now that the first line is now indented by 20 pixels, which is great. So if I give it a background of blue just to show you a bit more clearly, yeah, so we can see the first few words here are indeed blue, and that means we need to actually add in a few more words to our span, and probably just copy and paste a few of these words from the second line and paste that in there. Okay, so we're probably going to have to actually add a background in here to our CSS to the generic fet-indent class. Okay, so I think that's actually fine. And we just need to add a bit more indentation into that first line there, that first span, but that's probably enough words inside of the first span class there. And at this point, I don't think it's actually a bad idea to basically add in all these span indent classes to all of our lines, just to get everything brought back to a base margin left. You can see now that each line is indented by 20 pixels or given a margin left of 20 pixels. And I've also saved you the trouble of watching me painstakingly add and remove words from each different line to basically make it look like it all fits into the testimonial perfectly. Now, before we move on and change each line's indentation, a little tool I've used to do this for each testimonial is a little Chrome extension called Protractor. And what this does essentially is basically adds an overlay to your web page that we can use to actually find the exact angle of our testimonial. And then we can use this to line all of our text up line by line. And I'm not going to bore you doing this manually line by line. So basically here's one I made earlier. The first line is 46, 42 is the second, 34, 30, and so on. So this seems to suit this first testimonial perfectly. Right, let's lose the blue background and see how that looks now. Okay, that is pretty spot on, I think. So now let's do the same for all of the other testimonials. And again, I'm not going to bore you. I'm just going to whip it up as if by magic yet again. And we can see here scrolling around that each fet-indent class has been added to each testimonial. And basically it suits each testimonial for the value given. So on the last one, we've got 40, 34, 28, and so on. All of these values that have been put in here have been basically put in via trial and error. And as mentioned previously, it is a little bit tedious. So now we need to position the speech bubble tail and the author, which is currently in the testimonial area. So each testimonial has a different height because of the varying text inside. Thus, a different bottom value is needed for both elements, that is the speech bubble tail and author. We can add a unique identifier to each testimonial to allow us to easily position the tail and author by adding the testimonial's author as a class. So there's Ralph put in, there is Tim, and then next is Isla, yep. And then we've got Bernard, and finally we've got Homer. Now back into our style sheet, we're going to create a generic class for each of these citations. So I'm going to say fet testimonials site, give it a background just so we can see what's going on of blue. And then we'll say position is absolute. Give it a bottom of 0, just so it gets all the way down there to our speech tail. And then give it a left of 100 pixels. So already that's a pretty decent position. We can use this now to tweak each of these testimonial citations. But that's a good start. And I think it's now time to actually position each individual citation. So I'm going to create a little area here called specific testimonial authors. And pop in fet testimonial site. And then fet testimonial, and then give it the name we gave previously, which is Ralph for the first testimonial. And I'm going to overwrite the generic citation. I'm going to call this bottom 50 pixels, probably a bit too low there. So I'll say 80 pixels. And that looks good to me. So that's pretty close to the testimonial area. Let us now tweak the bottom position for Ralph's testimonial tail background image. So here I'm going to target the before pseudo selector on the fet testimonial inner div, with the Ralph class as the parent. It currently has a bottom position of 80 pixels, but let's tweak that slightly. So let's change it to 50, and that's a bit too much. Maybe 70. Okay, getting closer, 75, maybe 74. And that is the sweet spot right there. So I think Ralph is just about done there for positioning. And I'm just going to do this for the other testimonials now, the citation and the pseudo before selector. And yeah, basically I'm just going to tweak the values until it basically looks right, until the speech bubble tail background is flush with the bottom of the testimonial white background. And basically until the citation is just a few pixels below the testimonial white background. And again, just to reiterate, it's not an exact science. I do kind of eyeball it quite a lot, but that looks okay to me. Moving on. So now we can actually remove the blue background. And our carousel is looking one step further to being finished. Okay, so now for this next step, I downloaded an image from freepik.com. And basically this website offers tons and tons of images for free that you can use in your projects. So I found this image that I quite like and thought it could work quite well with the testimonials area. So I downloaded it and then tweaked it a little bit in Illustrator. So we're going to add this in now. We could include this as a background image in the main wrapper div, which is inside of the fet testimonials section. But I think this area is a tad too small at 960 pixels. So I'm going to create a new parent wrapper that will be wider by 100 pixels to accommodate this red pattern. And I'll give it a class name of wrapper-bg. Let's indent everything there and add the closing tag. Let us now navigate back into the style sheet so we can actually style up this new div. So wrapper-bg, and we'll give it a border of 2 pixels solid yellow. And all we're really doing here is essentially creating a new wrapper that just has a larger width. So same as wrapper, I'm going to add in a position of relative. Width is 100%. Give it a max width, but this time give it a value of 1060 pixels. And let's expand this browser window a little bit. Okay, so we can see 50 pixels either side, 100 pixels all in, and that will accommodate our background image now in a moment. And then give it a margin of 0 auto, just to center the whole carousel as before. Right, so everything's a little bit squished up here. Now let's give it some padding. So I'm going to say padding is 100 pixels top and bottom, and then 15 pixels left and right. And now to add the piece de resistance, the background image. So we're just going to say background, URL, and then red pattern bg.png. Center everything here. Okay, that's already in view now and it's looking good. So yeah, we're going to say center for top and bottom, slash cover and no repeats. And let's remove that yellow border now. And this carousel is looking pretty tasty. So we can see here at the top and bottom, we do have an issue with some padding that we have to remove from the testimonials area. So instead of 75 pixels top and bottom, what I can do now is just say 0. And this removes it perfectly. Okay, getting super close to wrapping this up now. So one more little issue here regarding the spacing. The description probably just needs a bit of margin bottom to just separate itself a bit more from the carousel. So I'll say margin bottom, maybe 50 pixels. And that's perfect. Okie dokie. So if you've made it this far, congratulations. It's not a huge video by any means, but still 26 minutes in is an accomplishment. So what we're going to do now as the last piece of the puzzle is to basically add in the left and right gradients to our carousel to basically make it look like it's blending into the page. And how I'm going to do this is again use our pseudo before selector, and I'll create a pseudo after selector for the left and right gradients. But for the moment, I'm just going to give it a solid yellow background color just to see where we're at. And next we need to make it position absolute and give it a content of an empty value. And now we just need to give it a width and a height. So we should be able to see this now coming into view. Just like that. Okay, now we just need to position this pseudo before selector. So we're going to say bottom 0. Yep. And left 0. Okay, lovely stuff. Now we can see an issue here that the carousel is actually overlapping the gradient area, the yellow background. So we can just say Z index is 1. So then that will be above the carousel area now. So that's the left gradient area done there. Let's do the right one now. So let's copy and paste the before pseudo selector and change it to after. So this will inherit all of the attributes of the before selector. So now we can tweak the pseudo after select elements and change the right value to 0 and the left to auto. And that is positioned now correctly to the right. And it is now time to create our background gradients. And I'm going to use a website called cssgradients.io. And essentially, I'm just going to play around until it looks kind of correct. And after about 5 minutes, I've come up with this. So we've created a linear gradient, 90 degrees from left to right. We have 3 color stops, all red in color. The first one is 100% transparent. The second stop is 100% opaque. And finally, the third stop with, again, 100% opaque. Let us now replace these yellow backgrounds with these linear gradients. And if we expand the editor just a little bit, we can go through what we've just done. So the gradient from cssgradients.io, I've pasted that into the after pseudo selector. And for the before pseudo selector, I've pasted in the same code, but I flipped it around. So instead of left to right, I've changed it to right to left with the 270 degrees value. So if we have a proper look here now and actually see our finished results, we can see that those 2 gradients make it appear that the carousel is kind of blended into the background, making it all look pretty cool in my opinion. We do actually need to get rid of that white border though, so let's do that now. And there we go, so much better. That is looking really, really good. Actually, I just noticed one last thing we do need to do is probably make that citation a color of white. And just like that, we are done. We are now left with a beautiful, unique carousel with speech bubbles, active testimonials, and angled text. I definitely haven't come across many of these in my travels. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks very much for watching if you made it this far, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.